The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Roswell, New Mexico territory, when Josephine Evans stepped off the stagecoach and directly into a pile of horse manure. It was 1879, and the journey from Philadelphia had drained her of everything except determination. And now, as she stood ankle-deep in filth while onlookers snickered, that determination was being sorely tested. "Welcome to Roswell, madam," the stagecoach driver said with a poorly concealed grin as he handed down her trunk. Josephine lifted her chin and her skirts. "Thank you kindly," she replied, refusing to acknowledge her predicament. At 24 years old, she had already faced worse than soiled boots. The death of her parents had left her with little choice but to accept her uncle's begrudging offer of a teaching position at the town's newly established schoolhouse. She surveyed the dusty street, lined with wooden buildings in various states of disrepair. A saloon with swinging doors stood prominently at the center, the raucous laughter inside suggesting business was thriving despite the early hour. Opposite stood a general store, a small bank, and what appeared to be the sheriff's office. The schoolhouse, according to her uncle's letter, was at the edge of town. "Need help with that trunk, miss?" A boy of about 12 approached her, all freckles and eager smile. "Yes, thank you." "I'm headed to the schoolhouse. I'm the new teacher." The boy's eyes widened. "You're Miss Evans. My ma said you'd be coming. I'm Billy Henderson. I'll be in your class come Monday. Pleased to meet you, Billy." She managed to smile despite her exhaustion. "Lead the way, please." As they walked, Josephine became acutely aware of the stares following her. Women in calico dresses whispered behind hands, and men tipped their hats with curious glances. She knew what they saw: a woman too tall, too plain, with spectacles perched on her nose and books clutched to her chest. "An outsider? That there's the saloon," Billy pointed out unnecessarily. "Pa says I ain't allowed near it, but everyone knows Tucker Daniels runs the place when he ain't riding with his cattle." Tucker Daniels. The name meant nothing to her, but she appreciated the boy's attempt at conversation. "The meanest cowboy in the territory," Billy said with undisguised admiration. "They say he once took down 3 outlaws single-handed after they tried to steal his herd. Owns the biggest ranch outside town. Folks cross the street when they see him coming." "He sounds terrifying," Josephine remarked dryly. "Oh, he is, Miss Evans, but he's fair too, pays his men better than most, just don't cross him is all." Josephine nodded absently, already thinking about the schoolhouse and the challenges that awaited her there. She had no interest in the local legends or intimidating cowboys. She had come to teach, to build a life for herself, and perhaps, eventually, to forget the disappointments that had driven her west. The schoolhouse turned out to be a modest but sturdy building with rows of wooden benches inside and a small bell tower atop the roof. Adjacent to it stood a small cabin that would serve as her quarters. Her uncle, the town's only doctor, had arranged everything by correspondence but was currently away attending to patients in a neighboring settlement. "Will this do, Miss Evans?" Billy asked, setting down her trunk. "It's perfect," she lied. The cabin was dusty with cobwebs in the corners and a faint smell of mustiness, but it was hers. "Thank you, Billy. I'll see you in class on Monday." After the boy left, Josephine sank onto the narrow bed and allowed herself a moment of doubt. The journey west had depleted her savings, and she had little to fall back on if this position didn't work out. Her teaching credentials from Philadelphia meant little here, and she knew the townspeople would be judging her from the moment she opened her mouth. She was still contemplating her situation when a commotion outside drew her attention. Looking through the window, she saw a group of men on horseback thundering down the main street. At their head rode a tall figure on a midnight black stallion. Even from a distance, she could see the hard set of his jaw and the dangerous way he carried himself. "Tucker Daniels," she murmured, recalling Billy's description. The man certainly matched the fearsome reputation, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that seemed to cut through everything they gazed upon. A scar ran down one cheek, and the gun at his hip looked well used. Josephine watched as the riders dismounted outside the saloon. The other men deferred to Tucker, stepping aside to let him enter first. There was something fascinating about his movements, economical, deliberate, as if he never wasted energy on unnecessary gestures. She shook herself out of her observation. What did it matter to her who the local cowboy was or what he did? She had a classroom to prepare and lessons to plan. The sooner she established herself as a competent teacher, the sooner the townspeople would accept her. The next morning, Josephine rose with the sun and headed to the general store to purchase supplies. The shopkeeper, a portly man named Mr. Wilson, eyed her with undisguised curiosity. "You must be the new schoolmarm," he said as she selected pencils and paper. "From back east, I hear." "Philadelphia," she confirmed, adding a slate to her pile. "I'm looking forward to meeting my students on Monday." He didn't sound convinced. Tough bunch, some of them. Last teacher didn't last 3 months before he ran back to Kansas City. "I'm not planning on running anywhere," Josephine replied firmly. "These children deserve an education, and I intend to provide it." Mr. Wilson snorted. "Noble sentiments, miss. We'll see how long they last." As he totaled her purchases, the store's door swung open, and the atmosphere instantly changed. Conversations halted, and several customers stepped back. Josephine turned to see Tucker Daniels filling the doorway, his presence somehow making the store seem smaller. "Wilson," he nodded to the shopkeeper, then his eyes landed on Josephine. They were a startling blue, almost gray, like the sky before a storm. "Madam," she nodded in acknowledgement, determined not to be intimidated. "Good morning." Tucker held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, then moved past her to the counter. "Need supplies for the ranch: flour, coffee, ammunition." His voice was deep, with a roughness that suggested it wasn't often used for conversation. "Right away, Mr. Daniels." Wilson hurried to gather the items. Abandoning Josephine's purchase halfway through, she stood there, unsure whether to wait or protest when Tucker glanced at her again. "You're the new teacher." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, Josephine Evans." "Heard the last one couldn't handle it." "Perhaps he lacked perseverance," she replied coolly. A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face before disappearing back into its stony expression. "Perseverance won't stop a ranch kid from putting a snake in your desk, madam." "No, but respect might, something I intend to earn." He studied her for a moment longer, then turned back to Wilson. "Add the lady's purchases to my bill." Josephine stiffened. "That's not necessary, Mr. Daniels. I can pay for my own supplies. Consider it a welcome gift, Miss Evans." He didn't look at her as he spoke. "This town needs a good teacher. Hope you're up to it." Before she could respond, he collected his supplies and left, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Josephine stood there, torn between gratitude and annoyance at his presumption. "Better accept it, miss," Wilson advised quietly. "Tucker Daniels doesn't make offers lightly. Besides, teacher's salary ain't much around here." Reluctantly, she nodded. "Please thank him for me if you see him before I do." "Doubt he's expecting thanks," Wilson replied, handing over her wrapped purchases. "But I'll pass it along." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity as Josephine cleaned the schoolhouse and prepared it for Monday's lessons. She was sweeping the front steps when a woman approached, leading a young girl by the hand. "Miss Evans, I'm Martha Henderson, Billy's mother." She was a tired-looking woman with kind eyes. "Thought you might like some company for supper tonight, being new and all." "That would be lovely, Mrs. Henderson, thank you." "Martha, please, and this is my daughter, Lucy. She'll be starting school this year." The little girl peeked shyly at Josephine from behind her mother's skirts. "Hello, Miss Evans." "Hello, Lucy. I'm very pleased to meet you." Josephine knelt to the child's level. "Are you excited about school?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "Billy says you're going to teach us about far-off places." "That's right, and reading and numbers and many other things." Martha smiled at the exchange. "Come by at 6 then. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty." Dinner with the Hendersons proved to be exactly what Josephine needed. Their small home was warm and welcoming, and Martha's husband, John, was a quiet but pleasant man who worked at the livery stable. The conversation flowed easily, mostly about the town and its inhabitants. "So you've met Tucker Daniels," Martha said as they sat around the table. John says he bought your supplies today. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. News travels fast in Roswell, I see. John Henderson chuckled. Not much happens here that folks don't know about by sundown. Tucker's a good man, despite what people say. Tough as rawhide, but fair. Billy seems quite in awe of him, Josephine remarked. Most boys around here are, Martha sighed. They see the gun and the horses and that dangerous reputation. They don't see the price he's paid for it. What do you mean? John and Martha exchanged glances. Tucker came here about 10 years back, barely more than a kid himself, John explained. Started with nothing but worked harder than any 3 men, built that ranch up from scratch, but he lost his brother in a raid by rustlers 5 years ago. Never been the same since. I'm sorry to hear that, Josephine said quietly. War changed him too, Martha added. He doesn't talk about it, but folks know he fought for the Union, came back different like many did. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Josephine found herself thinking about Tucker Daniels long after she'd returned to her cabin. The man was an enigma, intimidating and gruff, yet apparently respected enough that people defended him in his absence. She pushed the thoughts aside. The cowboy's life was none of her concern. She had students to focus on. Monday morning arrived with a cool breeze that hinted at the approaching autumn. Josephine rang the school bell at 8 o'clock sharp, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation as children began filing into the schoolhouse. There were about 20 in all, ranging from 6-year-old Lucy to teenagers on the cusp of adulthood. She recognized several faces from her brief time in town, including Billy Henderson, who gave her an encouraging smile. Others regarded her with open curiosity or, in the case of a few older boys at the back, barely disguised skepticism. "Good morning," she began, trying to project confidence. "I'm Miss Evans, and I'll be your teacher. I believe education is a gift that no one can ever take from you, and I intend to make sure each of you receives that gift in abundance." A snicker from the back interrupted her. A boy of about 16 with a shock of red hair leaned back in his seat. "My pa says book learning don't put food on the table," he drawled. "Says I'm wasting my time here when I should be working the ranch." Instead of reprimanding him, Josephine smiled. "And what's your name?" Sam Mitchell." "Well, Sam, please tell your father that a man who can read contracts doesn't get cheated on cattle prices. A man who can calculate quickly knows when he's being shortchanged at market, and a man who can write a proper letter might one day win the heart of a lady who appreciates such things." There were a few giggles, and even Sam looked momentarily taken aback. "Now," Josephine continued, "I'd like each of you to come up and tell me your name and one thing you hope to learn this year." By midday, Josephine had begun to sort the children into groups based on their abilities. Some could barely write their names, while others, like Billy, showed a natural aptitude for learning. She was pleased with their progress and the general atmosphere of cooperation, despite a few restless moments. As she dismissed them for the lunch hour, she noticed a tall figure leaning against a tree across from the schoolhouse. Tucker Daniels stood watching, his expression unreadable. When he saw her looking, he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement but made no move to approach. Curious, Josephine crossed the yard toward him. "Mr. Daniels, is there something I can help you with?" "Just passing by," he replied, though the schoolhouse wasn't on the way to anywhere in particular. Sam Mitchell giving you trouble, so he'd been watching long enough to see the exchange. "Nothing I can't handle." Tucker's mouth twitched slightly. "His father's one of my ranch hands, good worker, but has strong opinions about schooling." "Many people do," Josephine said diplomatically. "Thank you, by the way, for the supplies. It was very generous." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. "Like I said, town needs a good teacher." "And do you think I'll be one, Mr. Daniels? You seem to have your doubts." Tucker looked at her directly then, his gaze intense. "Doesn't matter what I think, Miss Evans. Matters what those kids think. And whether you're tough enough to stick it out when things get hard." "I assure you I'm tougher than I look." "Hope so." He straightened up from the tree. "Mitchell boy's smart, just needs the right handling." Before she could respond, he was walking away, leaving Josephine to wonder about the enigmatic cowboy who seemed to care more about the town's education than he let on. The weeks passed quickly, as Josephine settled into life in Roswell. The children, for the most part, responded well to her teaching methods, though there were inevitable challenges. Sam Mitchell remained aloof but had stopped actively disrupting class. Several other children showed remarkable progress, particularly in reading. She saw Tucker Daniels occasionally in town, always with a nod of acknowledgement but rarely conversation. It was from others that she pieced together more about him, how his ranch employed a dozen men, how he'd once ridden through a blizzard to fetch the doctor for a sick child, how despite his fearsome reputation, no one could recall him ever drawing his gun in anger within the town limits. One Friday afternoon, as Josephine was gathering her things to leave the schoolhouse, she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw Sam Mitchell surrounded by 3 older boys who weren't from her school. They were pushing him, taunting him about something she couldn't hear. Without thinking, she rushed outside. "What's going on here?" The largest of the unknown boys, practically a man at 18 or 19, sneered at her. "Nothing that concerns you, lady. Go back to your books." Sam looked mortified. "It's fine, Miss Evans. I can handle this." 3 against 1 hardly seems like handling it, Josephine replied, stepping between Sam and the bullies. "I suggest you boys move along now, or what?" The ringleader laughed. "You gonna hit us with your slate, schoolmarm?" "No, but I might." The deep voice came from behind them. Tucker Daniels sat atop his black stallion, his expression glacial as he stared down the young troublemakers. "Been looking for you 3. Your pa knows you're in town causing trouble, Jenkins." The boys paled visibly. "Mr. Daniels, I know exactly what you were just doing. Now get out of here before I decide to have a conversation with your fathers about how you spend your time." They scattered like quail, leaving Sam looking both relieved and embarrassed. Tucker dismounted, approaching the boy with a critical eye. "You hurt, Mitchell?" "No, sir," Sam mumbled, not meeting his gaze. "Good, your pa needs you at the ranch, sent me to fetch you." He jerked his head toward the horse. "Hop on, I'll walk alongside." Sam hesitated, glancing at Josephine. "Go on," she encouraged. "Thank you for your help today, Sam. You did excellent work with those fractions." The boy's ears turned red at the praise, but he managed a quick nod before climbing onto Tucker's horse. Tucker himself turned to Josephine, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Appreciate you stepping in, Miss Evans. Not many would face down boys twice their size. They're still children, Mr. Daniels, regardless of their size, and I take the safety of my students seriously." "Notice that." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Mitchell's boy has been talking about your lessons at the ranch. Says you make learning seem worthwhile." Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. "He said that. He barely speaks in class. Some thoughts are harder to say to a person's face." Tucker adjusted his hat. "There's a town social tomorrow night. Dance at the meeting hall. You planning to attend?" The question caught her off guard. "I hadn't given it much thought. People should meet the teacher proper, like, not just seeing you at school or church." Was that an invitation? She couldn't tell from his neutral tone. "Perhaps I will then," she replied carefully. Tucker nodded once, then turned to join Sam, who was waiting atop the horse. "Evening, Miss Evans." Josephine watched them go, the tall cowboy and the gangly boy, an odd pair making their way down the dusty street toward the open country beyond. Something warm unfurled in her chest at the sight, not quite attraction, not exactly admiration, but a growing curiosity about the man behind the stern exterior. The town social proved to be a lively affair. The meeting hall was decorated with paper streamers, and a small band played cheerful tunes that had couples whirling around the dance floor. Josephine wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and had arranged her hair more carefully than usual. Martha Henderson found her shortly after she arrived. "You came, I'm so glad. John and I were hoping you would." She looked around conspiratorially. "And not just us, I suspect. Tucker Daniels asked if you'd be here tonight." Josephine felt an unwelcome blush creep up her neck. "He merely suggested it would be a good opportunity to meet more townspeople." Martha's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that explanation for a second. "Of course. Well, he's over by the punch bowl, looking as uncomfortable as a cat in water." Poor man never did like these gatherings, but he shows up out of a sense of duty to the town. Josephine followed Martha's gaze and spotted Tucker standing apart from the crowd, nursing a cup of punch and looking indeed like he'd rather be anywhere else. His usual trail clothes had been replaced with a clean shirt and vest, though he still wore his gun belt, a reminder that even at a social gathering, danger could be present. "Don't let his manner fool you," Martha continued. "That man has a good heart. Just buried it deep after all he's been through." Before Josephine could respond, the music changed to a lively reel, and John Henderson appeared to claim his wife for a dance. Josephine found herself alone, watching the couple spin around the floor with a mixture of enjoyment and wistfulness. "Not dancing, Miss Evans?" The familiar deep voice came from beside her, and she turned to find Tucker standing closer than she'd expected. "No partner, Mr. Daniels," she replied with a small smile. He looked at the dance floor, then back at her, an internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he set down his cup and extended a hand. "Would you care to remedy that situation?" Josephine blinked in surprise. "You dance, Mr. Daniels?" A hint of amusement crossed his features. "Poorly, but yes, unless you'd rather continue standing here watching others enjoy themselves." "When you put it that way." She placed her hand in his, noting the roughness of his palm against her skin. "I accept, though I warn you I'm not particularly skilled either. Then we'll make a fine pair of clumsy dancers." Contrary to his claim, Tucker moved with unexpected grace as he led her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was light but secure, and he guided her through the steps with confidence. They didn't speak at first, both concentrating on the rhythm and the movements. "You're better at this than you claimed," Josephine finally said as they turned through a particularly complicated figure. "Don't let it get around," he replied, his voice low. "Bad for my reputation." "And what reputation is that, Mr. Daniels?" "The fearsome cowboy who terrifies the local children," his expression darkened slightly. "Is that what people say?" "Some. Others say you're fair and honorable, that you help people when they need it." The music slowed, and so did their steps. Tucker was looking at her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "And what do you say, Miss Evans?" Josephine considered her answer carefully. "I say you're a man who prefers people to think the worst of him while quietly doing your best for them. I wonder why that is." The question seemed to catch him off guard. His hand tightened slightly on hers, then relaxed. "Expectations are simpler that way. Simpler perhaps, but lonely." Tucker's eyes narrowed. "You've been asking about me. People talk, I listen. It's a small town, Mr. Daniels." The music ended and they stood for a moment, still connected, before Tucker released her hand and stepped back. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Evans." "Josephine," she said suddenly. "My name is Josephine." He studied her for a long moment. "Tucker," he finally offered in return. "Though most folks just call me Daniels." "Tucker," she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her tongue. "Thank you for the dance." He nodded, then turned and walked away, leaving Josephine standing alone on the dance floor with the distinct feeling that something significant had just occurred, though she couldn't have said exactly what. The social continued around her, but Josephine found her attention repeatedly drawn to Tucker, who had positioned himself by the door, occasionally speaking to the men who approached him but mostly watching the proceedings with his characteristic reserve. She was about to approach him again when a commotion at the entrance caught everyone's attention. 3 men burst in, dust-covered and grim-faced. They headed straight for the sheriff, who was enjoying the festivities with his wife. "Trouble at the Mitchell Ranch," one of them announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Rustlers hit them hard. Tom Mitchell's been shot." A ripple of concern spread through the crowd. Tucker immediately pushed away from the wall, striding toward the men. "How bad?" "Bad enough." "Doc's with him now, but they took most of his herd, left him for dead." Tucker's face hardened. "Sam, boy's fine, found his pa and raised the alarm. He's at the ranch with his ma." Without another word, Tucker headed for the door, pausing only to speak briefly to the sheriff. Josephine, moved by concern for her student, followed him outside. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked as he untied his horse. Tucker glanced at her, seeming surprised to find her there. "Stay in town. Things might get dangerous if those rustlers are still around. Sam is my student." I'm worried about him. Something in Tucker's expression shifted. Boys had a shock. Seeing his pa like that might help to have his teacher there. He hesitated, then added, could use someone with a steady hand to help tend Mitchell while the doc does what he can. I've had some experience with nursing, Josephine offered. My father was ill for many years before he passed. Tucker nodded once, then extended his hand. Come on then, but you do exactly as I say. If there's trouble, understand, understood. He helped her mount behind him, and she hesitantly placed her hands at his waist. The horse took off at a gallop, and Josephine had no choice but to hold tightly to Tucker as they raced through the darkness toward the Mitchell ranch. The ride was long and mostly silent, the pounding of hooves and the wind rushing past them making conversation difficult. Josephine was acutely aware of Tucker's solid presence before her, the warmth of his back against her cheek when she leaned forward to avoid being jolted off. They arrived at a small homestead where several lamps burned in the windows. Tucker helped her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he led the way inside. The scene that greeted them was grim. Tom Mitchell lay on a bed in the main room, his face ashen, a bloodied bandage wrapped around his torso. His wife knelt beside him while the doctor worked at the other side. Sam sat in a corner, his young face a mask of shock and fear. Josephine went immediately to the boy while Tucker conferred with the doctor. Sam, she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry about your father. Sam looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Miss Evans, what are you doing here? I came to help if I can. And to make sure you're all right, the boy's composure crumbled. They just rode in shooting. Pa tried to stop them, but there were too many. It's my fault. I should have been here instead of in town. No, Josephine said firmly. This is not your fault, Sam. You couldn't have prevented this. Miss Evans, Tucker's deep voice interrupted them. Doc could use your help with the bandages. Giving Sam's shoulder a final squeeze, Josephine moved to the bedside. For the next hour, she assisted the doctor as he cleaned and dressed Tom Mitchell's wound. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic, provided infection didn't set in. Throughout it all, Tucker moved between the house and the barn, organizing the remaining ranch hands, sending riders out to alert neighboring ranches about the rustlers, and making arrangements to secure what was left of the Mitchell herd. When Tom was finally stable and sleeping, his wife collapsed into a chair, exhaustion etched into her features. The doctor packed his supplies, promising to return in the morning. Josephine, her hands stained with blood despite her efforts to clean them, found herself at a loss for what to do next. You should get some rest, madam, she told Mrs. Mitchell gently. I can sit with your husband for a while. The woman nodded gratefully. Thank you, I just need an hour or two. Sam, you should sleep too. The boy shook his head stubbornly. I'm staying with Pa, Sam. Tucker spoke from the doorway where he'd just entered. Your mother needs rest, and so do you. I'll stay with your pa. Got men watching the property, so you don't need to worry about that. Sam looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Yes, sir. After mother and son had retired to the other room, Josephine found herself alone with Tucker and the sleeping patient. Tucker pulled up a chair on the opposite side of the bed, his expression grim as he looked at Tom Mitchell's pale face. Will they come back? Josephine asked quietly. Tucker shook his head. Not tonight. They got what they came for, but they'll hit another ranch soon enough. Do you know who they are? Have my suspicions. His jaw tightened. Gang that's been working this area for months, led by a man named Harlan Black. Used to ride with him years back before the war, before I knew what kind of man he really was. Josephine absorbed this information, noting the personal connection. You feel responsible. Tucker's eyes flashed to hers, hard and defensive. Didn't say that. You didn't have to. She met his gaze steadily. The way you're looking after the Mitchells, organizing everything, this is more than neighborly duty to you. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied her with those intense blue eyes. Finally he sighed, a sound of resignation. Known Tom Mitchell 15 years. Gave him a job when no one else would. His boy Sam was born the year I started my ranch, watched him grow up. He paused. And yes, if those rustlers are who I think they are, they might have come here because of me. How could that be your fault? Harlan Black holds a grudge. I testified against his brother years ago, got him hanged for murder. Harlan swore he'd make me pay. Josephine took this in, understanding dawning. That's why you keep people at a distance. You're protecting them. Tucker looked away, uncomfortable with her insight. People close to me tend to get hurt, Miss Evans. Better they think I'm cold than become targets. Josephine, she reminded him softly, and I think people are stronger than you give them credit for, capable of making their own choices about the risks they take. He looked back at her then, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes before he masked it. Maybe some are. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Tom Mitchell stirred in his sleep, breaking the spell. Tucker stood, moving to check on the injured man, and the conversation was over. They maintained their vigil through the night, taking turns dozing in the chair while the other watched over Tom. Josephine observed Tucker when he thought she wasn't looking the gentleness with which he adjusted Tom's blankets, the way his face softened when Sam peeked in to check on his father, the quiet competence he displayed in everything he did. By morning, Tom Mitchell was awake and coherent, though weak. The doctor returned, pronounced him stable, and left more laudanum for the pain. Mrs. Mitchell, rested and composed, took over the nursing duties. Tucker arranged for 2 of his ranch hands to stay and help with the remaining cattle. Time to get you back to town, Tucker told Josephine as they stood outside the Mitchell home. You've done more than enough here. Will you come back to Roswell too? He shook his head. Need to check on my own ranch first, make sure Black hasn't hit there as well. Then I'm going after those rustlers. Alarm shot through her. Alone, that's madness, Tucker. Sheriff's gathering a posse, but they'll move too slow. I know how Harlan thinks where he might hole up. And if you find him, 1 man against a gang of rustlers, Tucker's expression hardened. I can handle myself. That's not the point, Josephine insisted. This isn't just about you. What about the people who care about you, who would grieve if something happened? Not many in that category, Miss Evans. There's at least one, she said before she could stop herself. Tucker went very still, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Josephine, Mr. Daniels. One of his ranch hands rode up, interrupting whatever he had been about to say. Rider coming in fast, looks like it's from your place. Tucker turned immediately, his hand dropping to his gun as he watched the approaching horseman. The rider, a young man barely out of his teens, pulled his lathered horse to a stop in front of them. Mr. Daniels, thank God, they hit the main barn at dawn, set it on fire. Men managed to save most of the horses, but they drove off about 30 head of cattle. Tucker's face went cold with fury. Anyone hurt? Johnson took a bullet in the arm. Doc seeing to him, rest of us are fine. Get back there and tell the men I'm coming. As the rider galloped off, Tucker turned back to Josephine. One of my hands will take you back to town. I'm coming with you, she said firmly. Like hell you are. This isn't a schoolroom, Josephine. These men are killers. I'm not suggesting I join you in a gunfight. But your ranch hand is injured, your barn is burned, and from what I hear, you're short-staffed in the kitchen since your cook left last month. I can help there, at least. Tucker stared at her in disbelief. You're offering to cook for a bunch of cowboys while we hunt rustlers. I'm offering to be useful where I can be. It's Saturday, so I have no school until Monday. Would you rather I sit in town wringing my hands and wondering if you're dead or alive? For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, unexpectedly, a corner of his mouth twitched upward. Has anyone ever told you you're stubborn as a mule, Miss Evans? Frequently. Usually right before they discover I'm also right. That earned her a short, surprised laugh. Fine, but you stay at the ranch house. No riding out, no heroics. Agreed. The Daniels Ranch was larger than Josephine had expected, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs with a stone fireplace, several outbuildings and corrals stretching behind. The burned barn was still smoldering, men working to clear the debris and salvage what they could. Tucker was met by his foreman, a grizzled older man named Pete, who updated him on the situation while casting curious glances at Josephine. Miss Evans is going to help out around the house while we're tracking Black, Tucker explained briefly. She's the school teacher from town. Pete's eyebrows rose, but he simply nodded. Pleased to meet you, madam. Could certainly use the help with Johnson laid up. The interior of the ranch house surprised Josephine. It was clean and well furnished, with bookshelves lining one wall of the main room, not what she would have expected from a bachelor cowboy's home. Tucker showed her to the kitchen, a spacious area with a large stove and well-stocked pantry. Men usually fend for themselves with Johnson injured, but they'd appreciate a proper meal, he said, looking uncomfortable for the first time since she'd known him. Don't feel obliged to do anything fancy. I'll manage, she assured him. You focus on catching those rustlers safely. Tucker nodded, then hesitated. Josephine, about what you said earlier, it's all right, she interrupted, suddenly shy about her impulsive admission. You have more important things to worry about right now. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded again. We'll talk when I get back. After he left to join the men, Josephine set about exploring the kitchen and planning meals. She found the work soothing, a welcome distraction from worrying about Tucker and the dangerous mission he was undertaking. By evening, she had prepared a hearty stew for the ranch hands who remained behind. They entered the kitchen hesitantly, hats in hands, but their appreciation for the hot meal was evident in their enthusiastic consumption and sincere thanks. Been a while since we had a woman's cooking around here, Pete told her as he helped himself to seconds. Mr. Daniels tries to hire good cooks, but they never stay long, too isolated out here for most folks. It is remote, Josephine agreed, thinking of the long ride from town. But beautiful in its way, Pete nodded. Boss loves this land, built everything you see with his own hands mostly, lost a lot too over the years. His brother, Josephine asked quietly. Pete's weathered face registered surprise. He told you about that, must think highly of you, madam. Boss don't talk about Matthew to hardly anyone. I heard it from others, she admitted. He doesn't speak much about his past. No, he doesn't, Pete considered her thoughtfully. Matthew was the gentle one, good with horses, always had a smile for everyone. Tucker was always the serious one, even before the war. But after Matthew was killed by Black's gang, something in the boss just closed up, like he decided it wasn't worth letting people in if he was just going to lose them. Josephine absorbed this information, understanding more about the complex man who had captured her attention. And now he's gone after the same gang alone. Not alone, took 6 of our best men, but yes, it's dangerous business. Pete set down his empty bowl. Don't you worry though, madam. Boss is careful, despite what people think. He won't risk his men needlessly. But he'll risk himself, she said softly. Pete didn't deny it. That's the kind of man he is. The night passed slowly for Josephine. She tried to sleep in the small guest room Tucker had shown her, but worry kept her awake. She rose at dawn and was preparing breakfast when she heard horses approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Tucker and his men returning, their faces grim but intact. Relief flooded through her as she hurried outside. Tucker dismounted wearily, his clothes dust-covered, a day's growth of beard darkening his jaw. His eyes found her immediately, something like surprise flickering in them as if he hadn't expected her to still be there. Any luck? She asked, noting the absence of any prisoners. Found their camp. They'd already moved on, but we tracked them to the territorial line. Sheriff's men will take it from there. His voice was flat with exhaustion and disappointment. At least you're all back safely, she said, reaching out impulsively to touch his arm. Tucker looked down at her hand, then at her face, something shifting in his expression. You stayed. I said I would. The men filed past them toward the bunkhouse, a few tipping their hats to Josephine. Tucker remained standing with her in the early morning light, seeming reluctant to move away from her touch. There's coffee and breakfast inside, she offered. You must be hungry, he nodded, following her into the house. In the kitchen, she poured him coffee and served a plate of eggs and bacon she'd prepared. Tucker ate silently, the weariness of the unsuccessful pursuit evident in the slump of his shoulders. Black will be back, he finally said, setting down his empty cup. This isn't over. Perhaps not, but you've shown him you're not an easy target. Josephine sat across from him at the table. The sheriff will alert other ranches. People will be watchful. People will die if I don't stop him. Tucker's voice was hard. Matthew died because I wasn't there. Tom Mitchell nearly died yesterday. I won't let anyone else get hurt because of my quarrel with Harlan Black. It's not just your quarrel, Tucker. He's threatening everyone in this territory, and you can't take responsibility for the actions of an evil man. Tucker looked at her, his blue eyes troubled. Can't I? I knew what Black was capable of and let him live when I had the chance to end it years ago. Everything he's done since is on me. That's not true. You chose justice over vengeance. That makes you a good man, not a guilty one. He laughed bitterly. A good man, is that what you think I am, Josephine? Yes, she said simply. I do. Tucker stared at her, conflict evident on his face, then he stood abruptly. I need to check on the men, see to the horses. The wagon can take you back to town when you're ready. Tucker, thank you for your help. His voice was formal again, distant. The men appreciated the meals. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Josephine sat alone at the table, wondering if she'd somehow pushed too far, said too much. The connection she'd felt growing between them seemed suddenly fragile, threatened by Tucker's determination to shoulder his burdens alone. Reluctantly, she gathered her few belongings and prepared to return to town. Pete arranged for one of the hands to drive her in the wagon, and as they pulled away from the ranch, she looked back, hoping to catch a final glimpse of Tucker. He stood on the porch of the main house, watching her leave, his face expressionless at this distance. She raised a hand in farewell, and after a moment he returned the gesture. Back in Roswell, life resumed its routine. Josephine threw herself into her teaching, trying not to think about Tucker Daniels and the unresolved feelings between them. She visited the Mitchell family regularly, pleased to see Tom recovering and Sam returning to his studies with renewed focus. A week passed with no sign of Tucker in town. Then another. Josephine told herself it was for the best she had come west to teach, not to lose her heart to a troubled cowboy with a dangerous past. Yet she found herself looking up every time the schoolhouse door opened, hoping it might be him. It was Sam Mitchell who finally brought news. Mr. Daniels caught one of Black's men, he announced one day after class. Fellow came into the saloon drunk and was bragging about the raid on our ranch. Mr. Daniels happened to be there and took him prisoner. Sheriff's holding him now. Is he talking? Josephine asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Giving information about Black, Sam nodded eagerly. Pa says Mr. Daniels can be mighty persuasive when he wants to be. The fellow told him Black's planning something big, a raid on several ranches at once, including the Daniels place again. Wants to make some kind of example. Concern coursed through her. When? Don't know exactly. Soon, they think. Sheriff's organizing men from all the ranches to be ready. Sam hesitated, then added, Pa says Mr. Daniels asked about you, wanted to know if you'd visited us, how you were doing. Josephine's heart quickened. Did he? Yes, madam. Sam grinned suddenly. Pa thinks he's sweet on you. Sam Mitchell, she scolded, trying to hide her blush. That's hardly appropriate conversation. Sorry, Miss Evans, but the boy didn't look sorry at all as he gathered his books. Just thought you might want to know. After Sam left, Josephine sat at her desk, thoughts swirling. If Tucker had inquired about her, perhaps he hadn't been avoiding her intentionally. Perhaps he had simply been busy preparing for Black's next attack. The thought gave her a fragile hope. That evening, as she was preparing for bed in her small cabin, a knock at the door startled her. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders over her nightdress, she approached cautiously. Who is it? Tucker Daniels. Her heart leapt as she unlatched the door. Tucker stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable but determined. I apologize for the late hour. Is something wrong? She asked, pulling her shawl tighter. No, yes. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. May I come in just for a moment? Josephine hesitated, aware of the impropriety but unwilling to turn him away. Briefly, the neighbors are sure to talk as it is. Tucker stepped inside, his large frame making the small cabin seem even smaller. He stood awkwardly, turning his hat in his hands until Josephine gestured to one of the two chairs at her tiny table. He sat, and she took the other, waiting for him to speak. I wanted to thank you, he finally said, for what you did at the ranch and to apologize for how I left things. There's no need, there is, he interrupted. I was ungrateful and rude. Josephine smiled slightly. You were exhausted and disappointed, I understood. Tucker shook his head. It wasn't just that. What you said about me being a good man, it wasn't what I wanted to hear. Because you don't believe it. Because it makes things complicated. He looked at her directly. I've spent years keeping people at a distance, Josephine. It's simpler that way, safer for them and for me. And now there's a schoolteacher who stubbornly refuses to be kept at a distance. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Who sees things in me that I'd rather she didn't. Josephine's breath caught. What things? Tucker's smile faded, his expression turning serious. Possibility. That's what scares me most. You make me think about possibilities I'd given up on long ago. Is that so terrible? It is when Harlan Black is out there planning God knows what. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. I can't offer you anything, Josephine. Not while this threat hangs over me, not when anyone close to me becomes a target. I'm not asking you to offer me anything, Tucker. She met his gaze steadily. And I'm not afraid of Harlan Black. You should be, perhaps, but I'm more afraid of living a life dictated by fear. She hesitated, then reached across the table to touch his hand. We all face dangers, Tucker. That doesn't mean we stop living. He looked down at her hand on his, then slowly turned his palm upward, entwining their fingers. You're unlike anyone I've ever known, he said quietly. Braver than most men I've fought alongside. Not brave, she corrected. Just stubborn, remember? That drew a real smile from him, transforming his face in a way that made her heart race. Stubborn as a mule, I remember. They sat in silence for a moment, hands joined, the connection between them almost tangible in the quiet cabin. Then Tucker sighed and reluctantly withdrew his hand. I should go. It's late, and as you said, neighbors talk. Josephine nodded, rising with him. At the door, he turned back to her, his expression troubled again. Josephine, if Black comes, I'll be careful, she promised. But you must be too. Don't face him alone, Tucker. I won't, he said, though something in his eyes made her doubt his sincerity. He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek, the gesture so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. Good night, Josephine. Good night, Tucker. After he left, Josephine stood at the window, watching his tall figure disappear into the darkness. Despite the unresolved dangers hanging over them, her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Whatever lay ahead, she was no longer alone in facing it. The next few days passed in a state of heightened tension throughout Roswell. News of Black's impending raid had spread, and the sheriff organized watches and patrols. Josephine continued teaching, but she noticed fathers collecting their children after school rather than letting them walk home alone, and women shopping in pairs at the general store. Tucker appeared in town frequently, conferring with the sheriff and other ranchers, making preparations for the expected attack. He stopped by the schoolhouse occasionally, ostensibly to check if Josephine needed anything, but she suspected he was also ensuring she was safe. On Friday afternoon, as the children were leaving, Tucker arrived on horseback, his expression grim. Need to talk to you, he said without preamble as he dismounted. Once the last child had gone, Josephine invited him inside the schoolhouse. What's happened? Got word from a friendly Apache scout. Black and his men were spotted crossing into the territory yesterday, about 15 of them. Josephine felt a chill. When do you expect them? Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. Sheriffs doubled the patrols around town, and ranchers are bringing their families in for safety. Tucker hesitated. I want you to stay at the hotel until this is over. It's more secure than your cabin, and there will be men guarding it. She wanted to argue but saw the worry in his eyes and nodded. All right, I'll pack a few things and go there directly. Relief crossed his face. Thank you, I'll have someone escort you. That's not necessary, it is. His voice brooked no argument. I'm not taking chances with your safety, Josephine. Something in his tone made her heart skip. And what about your safety, Tucker? What are your plans? I'll be with the sheriff and his deputies patrolling the roads into town. If Black comes, we'll be ready. She studied his face, noting the determination there but also the fatigue. When was the last time you slept properly? Sleep can wait until Black is dealt with. You won't be much use in a fight if you're exhausted, she pointed out. Promise me you'll rest sometime today. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Is that an order, Miss Evans? a strong suggestion from someone who cares about your well-being. His expression softened. "I'll try now, get your things. Pete's waiting outside to escort you to the hotel." As he turned to leave, Josephine called after him. "Tucker," he paused, looking back. "Be careful." He nodded once, then was gone, leaving her with a sense of foreboding she couldn't shake. The hotel was crowded with families from outlying ranches, the atmosphere tense but controlled. Josephine found herself sharing a room with Martha Henderson and young Lucy, while John had joined the men patrolling the town. The hours crawled by, each creak of the building or shout from the street causing people to start nervously. As night fell, the tension increased. Children were put to bed while adults gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Josephine tried to remain calm, offering reassurance to those around her, but her own thoughts kept returning to Tucker, out there somewhere in the darkness, facing a man who had already taken so much from him. Around midnight, shots rang out from the edge of town. Everyone froze, listening as the gunfire continued, punctuated by shouts and the sound of galloping horses. The sheriff had left deputies to guard the hotel, and they now positioned themselves at windows and doors, guns drawn. Martha clutched Josephine's hand. "John's out there," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "The men are prepared," Josephine assured her, wishing she felt as confident as she sounded. They knew this was coming. The gunfire intensified, then gradually moved away from the town center. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two, with sporadic shots still audible in the distance. Finally, around 3 in the morning, a rider approached the hotel at a gallop. "It's over," he shouted as he dismounted. "Black's gang tried to hit the bank and the general store simultaneously, but we were waiting for them. Got 4 of them, including Black himself. Rest have scattered." A cheer went up from those inside, relief palpable in the air. Josephine felt her knees weaken with thankfulness, but then a terrible thought struck her. "Any casualties on our side?" she called out. The rider, whom she now recognized as one of the sheriff's deputies, sobered. "2 of the ranchers took bullets, but Doc says they'll live. Sheriff got a graze to the arm, and Daniels took a bad hit." Josephine's world seemed to stop. "Tucker, how bad?" "Don't rightly know, miss. They were taking him to Doc's place when I rode out. He was conscious, which is a good sign." Without thinking, Josephine headed for the door. Martha caught her arm. "You can't go out there, Josephine. It might not be safe yet." "I have to," she said simply, and something in her voice made Martha release her. "I'll come with you," Martha decided. "Lucy will be fine here with the other children." Together, they hurried through the darkened streets toward the doctor's house, passing groups of armed men still patrolling, but now with the relaxed posture of those whose vigilance had paid off. The doctor's windows glowed with lamplight, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal the sheriff leaving, his arm bandaged. "Miss Evans, Mrs. Henderson," he nodded, unsurprised to see them. "Your husband's fine, madam, inside helping Doc and Tucker." Josephine couldn't keep the anxiety from her voice. The sheriff's face turned grave. "Took a bullet meant for me. It's bad, miss, but Doc's doing what he can." Josephine pushed past him into the house, her heart pounding. The front room had been turned into a makeshift hospital, with 2 men on cots being tended by the doctor's wife. There was no sign of Tucker. "He's in the back room," Mrs. Wilson, the doctor's wife, told her gently. "Doc's with him now." Josephine moved toward the indicated door but hesitated, suddenly afraid of what she might find. Martha squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Go on, he'll want to see you." Taking a deep breath, Josephine entered the room. Tucker lay on a bed, his shirt removed, a blood-soaked bandage around his left shoulder and upper chest. His face was unnaturally pale, his breathing labored. The doctor stood over him, preparing to clean the wound. "Miss Evans," the doctor acknowledged her without looking up. "I need to get this bullet out. If you're staying, make yourself useful. Hold that lamp closer." Josephine moved to assist, forcing herself to remain calm despite the sight of Tucker's blood. As the doctor worked, Tucker regained consciousness, his eyes finding hers immediately. "Josephine," he whispered, his voice rough with pain. "You shouldn't be here." "Hush," she told him, fighting back tears. "Save your strength." The bullet extraction was a grueling process, but Tucker endured it stoically, his eyes never leaving Josephine's face as if drawing strength from her presence. When it was finally over, the doctor bandaged the wound and administered laudanum for the pain. "You're lucky, Daniels," he said gruffly. "An inch to the right and you'd be dead. As it is, you've got a broken collarbone and some torn muscle, but the bullet missed the lung. You'll heal with time and rest." Tucker nodded weakly, already drifting from the medication. The doctor turned to Josephine. "He needs sleep now. You can sit with him if you want, but he'll be out for hours." After the doctor left, Josephine pulled a chair to Tucker's bedside and took his hand gently in hers. His fingers twitched in response, his eyes fluttering open briefly. "Black," he murmured. "Dead," she assured him. "It's over, Tucker. You can rest now." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he succumbed to the laudanum. Josephine sat watching him sleep, the steady rise and fall of his chest reassuring her that the worst was past. She thought of all they had left unspoken, all the possibilities Tucker had mentioned that night in her cabin. Now, perhaps, they would have the chance to explore them. Dawn was breaking when Martha looked in on them. "John's gone home to check on Lucy," she said softly. "I can stay with Tucker if you want to rest." Josephine shook her head. "I'm not leaving him." Martha studied her friend's face, then nodded understanding. "I'll bring you some breakfast later." Throughout the day, visitors came and went. The sheriff returned to report that the remaining members of Black's gang had been captured or driven far from the territory. Pete arrived from the Daniels ranch, relief evident on his weathered face when he saw his boss sleeping peacefully. "Knew it'd take more than Harlan Black to bring him down," the old foreman said gruffly. "Boss is too stubborn to die." Josephine smiled at that. "He is at that." Late in the afternoon, Tucker finally awoke properly, his eyes clearer though pain still etched lines around his mouth. He seemed surprised to find Josephine still at his side. "You've been here all day. Where else would I be?" He looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. "Josephine, what I said before about not being able to offer you anything—" "Hush," she interrupted. "That was before. Things are different now, are they?" His expression was serious. "Black is gone, but the life I lead is still dangerous, still lonely. It doesn't have to be." She tightened her grip on his hand. "Not anymore." Tucker's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt or hesitation and finding none. "I ain't a kind man, Josephine, never have been. The war, Matthew's death, years of fighting men like Black, it changes a person." Josephine smiled, leaning closer to him. "Then let my kindness rub off a little," she whispered. "I have plenty to spare." Something in Tucker's face shifted, a barrier falling away. He reached up with his good arm to touch her cheek, drawing her toward him. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, but it held a promise that made Josephine's heart soar. "Stay," he murmured against her lips. "Not just today." "Stay with me, Josephine." "I intend to," she replied. "Someone has to make sure you actually rest and heal properly." A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming it in a way that took her breath away. "Stubborn as a mule," he said fondly. "You'll learn to appreciate that quality," she assured him, kissing him again. The road to recovery was long for Tucker. He chafed at the restrictions the doctor placed on him, wanting to return to his ranch and resume his normal activities. Josephine, true to her word, stayed by his side, dividing her time between teaching and caring for him. After a week at the doctor's house, Tucker was well enough to be moved, but instead of returning to his ranch, he took a room at the hotel in town to be closer to Josephine. Their courtship, as it became known around Roswell, progressed in the open. They took evening walks when Tucker was strong enough, dined together at the hotel restaurant, and attended church side by side on Sundays. The townspeople, who had long regarded Tucker with a mixture of respect and wariness, were amazed at the transformation in the stern cowboy. With Josephine, he smiled more, even laughed occasionally, though he remained a man of few words. "Never thought I'd see the day," Martha remarked to Josephine as they watched Tucker showing young Lucy Henderson how to whittle a small wooden horse. "That man's been carrying the weight of the world for so long, I wasn't sure he knew how to set it down." "He's learning," Josephine said softly. Day by day, as spring approached, Tucker regained his strength. The wound healed well, though the doctor warned he might always have some stiffness in that shoulder. He returned to his ranch but rode into town almost daily to see Josephine. Often they would sit on the porch of her cabin in the evenings, talking about their pasts, their hopes, the future they might build together. "I was engaged once before the war," Tucker told her during one such evening. "Mary was her name. She didn't wait for me to return. Can't blame her. I came back a different man than the one she'd agreed to marry." Josephine leaned against him, her head on his good shoulder. "And I was courted by a banker's son in Philadelphia. He wanted a wife who would be content with teas and socials and raising perfect children. When I told him I wanted to teach to make a difference, he withdrew his attentions quite promptly." Tucker chuckled. "His loss, indeed." She looked up at him. "We've both taken winding paths to find each other, Tucker. Perhaps that's why we recognize the value of what we've found." On a warm Saturday in May, Tucker invited Josephine to ride out to his ranch. "There's something I want to show you," he said, offering no further explanation. The ride was pleasant, the landscape coming alive with spring growth. As they approached the ranch, Josephine noticed changes. The barn had been rebuilt, larger than before, and there were new fences around the corrals. But Tucker guided her past the main buildings toward a gentle rise overlooking the property. At the top stood a newly constructed cabin, small but sturdy, with a wide porch and windows that caught the afternoon sun. Flowers had been planted along the walkway, and a pair of rocking chairs sat on the porch. "Tucker, what is this?" Josephine asked, though her heart already knew the answer. He helped her dismount, then took her hand, leading her toward the cabin. "Been building it these past weeks when I could. Pete and the boys helped when I couldn't manage alone." Inside was simple but beautiful polished wooden floors, a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture that must have been brought from the main house. One wall held a bookshelf already filled with volumes, and a desk stood by the window, perfectly sized for preparing lessons. "It's for you," Tucker said quietly, watching her face. "For us if you want it to be." Josephine turned to him, eyes shining. "Are you asking me to marry you, Tucker Daniels?" He nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know it's not much, it's perfect," she interrupted, stepping into his arms. "And yes, I want it to be for us." Tucker's face lit with a joy she had never seen there before. He pulled her close, kissing her deeply, all his usual reserve forgotten in that moment of happiness. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Josephine Evans. Never thought I'd say those words to anyone again, but I love you." "And I love you, my not-so-unkind cowboy," she replied, smiling through her tears. They were married 2 weeks later in the Roswell church, with the entire town turning out for the occasion. Sam Mitchell, now thriving in school and eager to follow in Tucker's footsteps as a rancher, served as best man. Martha Henderson stood with Josephine, little Lucy scattering wildflowers down the aisle ahead of the bride. Tucker, standing at the altar in a new suit, watching Josephine walk toward him in a simple white dress, thought of all the twists of fate that had brought them together. A schoolteacher from Philadelphia and a hardened cowboy, no one would have predicted their match, yet here they were, beginning a life he had never dared to dream of. As they exchanged vows, Tucker's voice was clear and strong, without a trace of his usual gruffness. Josephine's was steady and sure, her eyes never leaving his face. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation seemed to release years of tension from Tucker's shoulders. He kissed his bride without self-consciousness, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The celebration afterward was the liveliest Roswell had seen in years. Tables were set up outside the meeting hall, laden with food brought by every family in town. There was dancing and music, laughter, and a few happy tears. Tucker, who had avoided such gatherings most of his life, found himself at the center of the festivities, accepting congratulations with a graciousness that surprised even those who knew him best. "Never thought I'd see Tucker Daniels dancing at his own wedding," Pete remarked to the sheriff as they watched the couple whirl around the makeshift dance floor. "That woman has worked miracles." "It wasn't all her doing," the sheriff replied thoughtfully. "Man had it in him all along." Just needed someone to remind him there was more to life than survival. As the sun began to set, Tucker and Josephine slipped away from the celebration, riding back to their cabin on the hill. The beginning of their life together stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. "Happy, Mrs. Daniels?" Tucker asked as they stood on their porch, watching the last rays of light paint the landscape in gold. "Completely," Josephine answered, leaning into his embrace. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He kissed the top of her head. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "Your kindness, it did rub off on me." Josephine smiled up at him. "You always had kindness in you, Tucker, you just buried it deep. Well, it's unearthed now, thanks to you." He led her inside, closing the door on the gathering darkness, "and I don't intend to bury it again." Over the next year, life settled into a rhythm for the couple. Josephine continued teaching, riding to and from town each day, while Tucker ran the ranch with his usual efficiency but with a newfound willingness to delegate that allowed him more time at home. Their cabin became a warm, inviting place, with Josephine's books and Tucker's craftsmanship creating a perfect blend of their personalities. They had their disagreements, of course. Josephine's independence sometimes clashed with Tucker's protective nature, and his occasional brooding silences tested her patience. But they learned to navigate these differences with the same determination they had brought to their individual lives before finding each other. The Daniels Ranch prospered under their joint care. Tucker's expertise with cattle was complemented by Josephine's head for numbers and organization. The ranch hands, initially skeptical about having a schoolmarm involved in operations, soon came to respect her intelligence and work ethic. In the spring following their marriage, Josephine discovered she was expecting a child. Tucker's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for, joy mingled with wonder and a touch of apprehension that he quickly mastered. "A father," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Never thought I'd see the day." "You'll be wonderful at it," Josephine assured him. "You have so much love to give, Tucker." He kissed her softly. "Because of you, you taught me how to love again, Josephine. Our child will have that gift because of you." Their son, Matthew John Daniels, was born on a crisp October morning, with Martha Henderson serving as midwife and Tucker pacing anxiously outside until the infant's first cry brought him rushing in. The sight of his wife, tired but radiant, holding their son, brought the stoic cowboy to tears. "He has your eyes," Josephine told him as Tucker tentatively took the bundled infant into his arms. "And your determination, I think," Tucker replied, noting the strong grip of the tiny hand around his finger. "Look at that. Boy knows what he wants already." The years passed, filled with the joys and challenges of parenthood and ranch life. Young Matthew grew into a sturdy boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's love of learning. He was joined 3 years later by a sister, Elizabeth, who from her earliest days showed signs of inheriting Tucker's skill with horses. Josephine continued teaching until the birth of their third child, Thomas, after which she devoted herself to educating their children at home and helping Tucker with the ranch, which had expanded considerably under their joint management. Tucker, once known as the most intimidating man in the territory, became respected as a fair employer and a devoted family man. He still wore his gun when necessary and could still quell trouble with a single hard look, but there was a peace about him now that even strangers noticed. The darkness that had once shadowed him had receded, replaced by a quiet contentment. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tucker surprised Josephine with a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children in Martha and John Henderson's capable care. It was the first time either of them had traveled so far from Roswell since settling there, and they enjoyed every moment of the bustling city life, the theaters, the restaurants, the beautiful hotel overlooking the bay. On their final evening, they walked along the waterfront, Josephine's arm tucked through Tucker's, both content in the comfortable silence they had come to cherish. "You ever regret it?" Tucker asked suddenly. "Coming west, marrying a rough cowboy instead of that banker's son?" Josephine looked up at him, surprised by the question after all these years. "Never, not for a single moment. Do you regret opening your heart again after all the loss you'd suffered?" Tucker's answer was to pull her close, kissing her with the same passion that had marked their first kiss a decade earlier. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her lips. "You and the children, you're everything, Josephine, everything I never knew I needed." They returned to Roswell and their growing family, to the ranch that had flourished under their care, to the community that had embraced them both. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, illness and occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers, but they faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with every test. As the years passed, Tucker and Josephine watched their children grow into fine young adults. Matthew, with his father's head for business and his mother's compassion, gradually took over more of the ranch operations. Elizabeth, spirited and adventurous, became known as the finest horsewoman in the territory. Thomas, the youngest, showed an aptitude for medicine and eventually left to study in Denver, though he returned frequently to visit. On a golden autumn afternoon, 30 years after they had first met, Tucker and Josephine sat in the rocking chairs on their porch, watching their grandchildren playing in the yard below. Tucker's hair had turned silver and Josephine's dark locks were streaked with gray, but they remained as devoted to each other as ever. "Remember what you said to me that night in the doctor's house?" Tucker asked, reaching over to take her hand. "About letting your kindness rub off on me." Josephine smiled, her eyes warm with memory. "I remember. Best offer anyone ever made me." He squeezed her hand gently. "You changed my life, Josephine, made me believe in possibilities again when I thought there were none left." "We changed each other," she corrected. "I was so focused on proving myself, on being independent, that I might have missed the chance for this life we've built. You taught me it was possible to be strong and still lean on someone else occasionally." Tucker chuckled. "Occasionally, you're still the most stubborn woman I've ever known. And you still pretend to be unkind when anyone outside the family is watching," she teased. "Some things never change. Some things shouldn't." He brought her hand to his lips. "I love you, Josephine Daniels, as much today as I did when I first realized it, maybe more. And I love you, Tucker. Always have, always will." Below them, their oldest grandchild, a girl of 7 with Tucker's blue eyes and Josephine's determination, called up to them. "Grandpa, come see the frog I caught." Tucker winked at his wife. "Duty calls." "Go on," Josephine smiled. "I'll be here when you get back." As Tucker made his way down to the yard, moving more slowly now but still straight-backed and strong, Josephine watched him with the same love that had blossomed all those years ago. The cowboy who had claimed he wasn't kind had become the most loving husband, father, and grandfather she could have imagined. Their life together had been a testament to the power of second chances, of opening one's heart after pain, of finding strength in vulnerability. In a land where survival often depended on toughness, they had discovered that true strength came from love, from letting kindness rub off, little by little, day by day, until it became the foundation of a life well lived. And in the golden light of that autumn afternoon, with the past behind them and family surrounding them, Tucker and Josephine Daniels knew they had built something truly precious together, a love that had not only endured, but had grown deeper and richer with each passing year. It was more than either of them had ever dared to dream, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.